Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're going to be talking about a trip that Claire and I took to Budapest last weekend. And Budapest is the capital of Hungary and sometimes referred to as the Paris of the East. I personally think that undersells Budapest. It's one of my favourite places I've been in the last few years. Camera wise for the trip, I took the Leica M10 and I also took the M6 as well. However, the M6 has a roll of film in it that's a little bit special and I can't develop, so it's going to be in a video in a few weeks time. So all images in this video are going to be from the M10, and lens wise I decided to take two. I took the 50mm Summilux and I also took the 28mm f2.8 Elmerit, which did mean that I left my newly acquired 35mm Summilux at home, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on as well. In terms of how this video is set out, it's going to be set out a little bit unconventionally. I've actually broke this video down into times of day, so we're going to have night photography first, we're then going to have sunset and sunrise, and then we're going to finish off with daytime excursions. So if you want to hop around this video, feel free, but we're going to kick off with night photography. And we're kicking off with night photography as when we landed, it was already pretty late in the afternoon. By the time we'd unpacked, we walked straight out into Budapest for the first time at night. Now Budapest itself lights up at night, all of the city lights come on, they light up attractions as well as like street lights, and it becomes a very, very different place to how it looks during the day. Now for me, I was actually pretty excited about shooting some low light photography because I've picked up this M10 in the last few months but haven't really done any low light photography at all. I was actually super impressed with how the M10 performed. I ended up capping my ISO at 6400 ISO and that ended up being just about right. I do think you could actually push the camera one more stop to 12,000 ISO. That's something I'm going to try on a future trip, but at 6400 I think you get good colours and more than acceptable noise. I also found that even though it was low light, I was able to use the 28mm Elmerit quite a lot. Even at f2.8, this lens was still very useful even in the dark evening. And then we've also obviously got the Summilux. When things got proper dark, this was the lens that I reverted to because that f1.4 just lets in so much more light than the 28mm did. But overall, thoroughly impressed with how the M10 got on. In terms of Budapest at night, I recommend that you take a bit of a walk along the river through the centre of the city, separating Buda and Pest, and you can get good photos from either side of the river. If you're on the Pest side, you can take pictures of Buda Castle on the opposite side and get some great images. You also then want to take a bit of a swap and go to the Buda side and take images of the Parliament building over on the Pest side. Overall, I thoroughly recommend that you take a walk during the night in Budapest because like I said, all of these lights come on a few minutes after sunset and I think they switch off at midnight or 1 AM depending on whether daylight savings on or off at the time. Next up then has got to be sunrises in Budapest. Sunrises have this opportunity that sunsets don't, and that's the fact that it's going to be far quieter. Sunsets in Budapest were so busy at all of the major landmarks that it really does make a sunrise worthwhile. If you do pull yourself out of bed for a sunrise, the one place that you've got to go has to be Fishermans Bastion. It's located on the Buda side of the town and is up at the top of Castle Hill. From up here you get panoramic views over the Pest side of the city, including the Parliament building that's almost perfectly opposite, and you can frame it in the arches of the Fisherman's Bastion. The Fisherman's Bastion itself looks absolutely stunning. It looks like it's out of a fairy tale. Some of the towers have a very like Disney feel to them. And from up here, you can actually see the sun rise over the horizon in front of you. So you do literally get to witness the sunrise. Now for us, the sunrise was pretty easy because the sunrise in October was at 7 o'clock. Definitely check your timings because in the summer months and maybe the spring months, that sunrise could be more like 4:30 in the morning, which is going to take an awful lot more willpower to get out of bed. This was, I think, our highlight of the trip. This sunrise experience was honestly amazing. And like I said earlier, we got hit about an hour before sunrise, and I would thoroughly recommend that because even that kind of blue hour before the sun actually rises, we got some of our favourite images on the trip. There is, however, even if you come here during the day, a composition that nobody seems to get and nobody seems to notice it's here. If you walk a little bit past Buda Castle to the corner near the hotel, you get this composition, and I think this might be my favourite image from the trip. You get the S curve of the road in the front of the image, and then you have different layers of depth to it. You've got the river, you've got the Parliament building, and that sunrise in the background. It's a composition that just nobody seems to realise is here, and it was super quiet even at this location during the day. Next up then, let's talk sunsets. The downside to the sunsets are the fact that they are super busy at all of the major attractions. One trick that we found to avoid the crowds though was to book a river cruise. The river cruises tend to take an hour. They go from one end of the river all the way to the other end and back again. Cost less than £10 per person, including a welcome drink. These hourly trips, it was really easy for us to like look on a weather app, see what time the sunset was, and book the right boat. Even if you ignore the photography element of this, I thoroughly recommend it to anyone. I actually got a little bit caught up in just taking in the city myself that I actually forgot to take some photos at some points. The river cruise just gives you a perspective that you can't get from anywhere else, and it was a thoroughly enjoyable part of the trip that I would recommend to anyone, even if you're not there with a camera taking photos. Away from the sunset, sunrise and night photography then, what did we get up to during the day? Now, one of the things that we knew before we even left the UK that we wanted to do was the Parliament building. You'll have seen some images of the Parliament building already, and if you're from the UK, you might be looking at their Parliament building and thinking, that looks a little bit like the Houses of Parliament in London. And you'd be absolutely right. So the architect of this building was actually using the London one as reference throughout the creation of the Hungarian Parliament building. So that's why there is some very close design similarities between the two. But what you can do is do a 45-minute audio tour on the inside. Annoyingly, it's not like a real tour, it's like an audio guide with a headset, but it was still worthwhile. It was one of the more expensive things we did, but when you're walking around the building, you get to see all the ornate rooms, and most importantly, you go into a kind of area where you're not allowed to take images, so I don't have any images of it, but you get to see the Hungarian crown, orb, and scepter. Definitely worth a trip, even though it's quite quick and slightly expensive. If you do find yourself in this area, then you've got to go and check out the shoes along the river. It might sound a little bit bizarre, but if you're just from the Parliament building to the river and have a look there, there is a very touching memorial to some of the Jews that lost their lives in World War II, where they would have been lined up across the front of the river, asked to take their shoes off, and unfortunately shot in the back. So it's a very sad memorial, but it's definitely worth taking in. And if you're here at night as well, people come out and sometimes put little tea lights inside the shoes, gives them a bit of a glow and kind of adds to the feel of the area. Definitely worth checking out, even though it has a very kind of sad background. Another architectural wonder that we took in during the day was gotta be St. Stephen's Basilica. When we first got here, the building itself on the outside looks magnificent, and the little courtyard area in the front gives you a really good opportunity to take some pictures with you in the foreground and the building in the background. Now, what's even more impressive than the outside of this building is definitely the inside. The inside is absolutely incredible. The domed roof is so high up, very ornately decorated, and all of the paintings up there fill this room with wonder. There's also a slightly bizarre relic in here as well, the literal hand of the first king of Hungary, definitely worth checking out. As part of your ticket, you probably got a trip up to the top as well, and if you do take the trip to the top, you do get 360 views of the city. We found actually that if you go to Fishermans Bastion, you get better views from up there just because of the location as opposed to St. Stephen's Basilica. Next up then, let's talk food. Some of the places that we went to in the evening that we enjoyed, one of them was a place called Caravans, which was like a street food vendor area. Great food, great beer as well. And I've been to Budapest before, and when I went to Budapest before, we went to this place called Fuego's that is basically like a Nando's, just 10 times better. And when I went before, I was dead certain that this was the best chicken I'd ever had. And if I ever came back to Budapest, that I would take another visit there. And we did. And I can still confirm it's still the best chicken I think I've ever had. The other place that we went to that we definitely can't forget is a place called the New York Cafe. We went here for lunch. It was pretty expensive, but the food was very good and there was live music. But the biggest attraction of this place has got to be the venue. And the photos probably speak for themselves here. In terms of drink in the evening, there's the ruin bars. We didn't visit them, but they're supposed to be pretty good. What we did find ourselves looking for was craft beers, and we went to a place called Madhouse. They had so many different craft beers on tap that were pretty well priced, and that was one of the places we really enjoyed. Away from the actual venues then and more onto the food. Food-wise, I'd recommend that you try out some goulash, some paprika chicken, and if you're feeling a little bit naughty, then you've got to try a chimney cake. Now for some tips that are specifically related to Budapest. First up has probably got to be something about the currency. The currency can feel a little bit confusing because it's a pretty crazy ratio. So for us right now, when we went, £1 was about 480 Hungarian forints, which can sometimes make menus when you're looking at them feel a little bit confusing. Don't be afraid to get your calculator out to check to see if the restaurant is well priced or not. Often we found that Budapest was actually surprisingly cheap, but there are the occasional places that you go to where they might catch you out because you just can't compute the prices. And then less relevant for this trip, but more relevant for when I went with my friends in the past, was the taxis. If you get into a taxi that you haven't already pre-booked, then make sure when you get into the taxi that you ask them to put the meter on. Often the taxi drivers wouldn't put the meter on, we didn't notice, and when we arrived at wherever we were going, they would just quote outrageous prices and get a little bit weirdly aggressive at times. For this trip, what we found was super easy to use was an app called Bolt. It's basically Uber, but not Uber, and I think you actually just pay the exact same prices that the taxis should be be charging you anyway. Whilst we were there in Budapest, the main chain bridge through the centre of the city was shut. This meant that often things that we thought were going to be kind of 10-15 minute walks on opposite sides of the river ended up being an hour-long walk because you had to walk a very long way the wrong way to get a different bridge and across. Or alternatively, again, use the taxis that we just talked about. But I think that bridge is going to be shut for about a year, so if you're watching this video pretty recent to when I've released it, then it's definitely worth checking out, because we booked our hotel right in the centre, and it would probably been more beneficial for us to actually book a hotel nearer one of the other two bridges, because it would have ended up being more convenient. Then when it comes to time of day, I thoroughly recommend that you prioritise a sunrise. That was our highlight of the trip by far, and also do a walk at night. The city, all like I said earlier, all lights up at night, and it's thoroughly worth a trip because it just feels very, very different, and if you don't experience it at night, I do think you're missing out on a very big aspect of Budapest. Then on to, I guess, my camera choice. So I took the M10 and the M6. I'm thoroughly impressed with the M10. I was excited to try out the low light, and I think it more than lived up to it. With the M6, I'm very excited to see what the film looks like in that, but that's going to be a future video. The 28mm Elbrit and the 50mm. Overall, I'm pretty glad that I took these two lenses. I do think I spent quite a lot of time swapping lenses. Because I had two cameras, I felt like every now and then I wanted to swap them, and I found myself swapping quite a lot. Partly because I knew I had an alternative. I do wonder if I just took the 35mm, whether that would have been a one camera, one lens combination, that maybe my photos wouldn't have been so good, but maybe I might have enjoyed the trip more. It's hard to know with hindsight, but I do still think that image-wise, maybe I did get the best because I took these two, but it's definitely getting me questioning the 28 and 50 versus just taking a 35. So if you couldn't tell, we absolutely loved our trip to Budapest. Budapest was one of my favourite places I've been in the last few years, and of all the places I've been, I think it's the one place that I have been and now think to myself, you know, I'd really like to live there for a few months and really take the city in. We spent 4 days there. I think 4 days was probably about right. I think if we had spent a week there, it was doable, but I do think we might have struggled a little bit on our last couple of days to work out what exactly we wanted to do. 4 days for us worked out about right. If you've got any questions about anything you've seen in this video, whether that's the cameras, the lenses, the trip itself, then please hit me up down in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. And if you've made it this far, please do not forget to like and subscribe. There's plenty more Leica, Fuji and travel content coming to the channel very, very soon. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.